Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Gomez, and I just wanted to welcome you to our webinar today for Acromedia. And today's subject is why B2B manufacturers need headless commerce. So pretty lengthy title, but basically we'll be discussing around, what is headless, what are some of the different architecture types, and why it might be appropriate to your B2B business, your B2B manufacturing business, specifically as opposed to in e-commerce or digital commerce in general. So as I said at the start, my name is Matt Gomez, but I'm going to hand over to Shawn McCabe first to do an introduction on who he is and what he does here at Acro.
Yeah, as mentioned, Shawn McCabe, CTO at Acro. So I lead everything tech related, specifically a lot of our internal builds around our headless setups. So hopefully I get to be the smart one.
Yeah, he most certainly will be the smart one. Shawn's introductions are always a little humble, but he is a world leader in open source architecture, compliance around e-commerce, and a bunch of other stuff. So he will most certainly be showing me up today with regards to aptitude. But the good thing is that I get to play a little bit of a patsy here and pretend to be a less well-informed prospect maybe or customer in my questions here. So that will certainly hide any ignorance that I maybe have. So on that, my name is Matt Gomez. I am the VP of Sales and Marketing at Acromedia. I've been in this role here at Acro for about 3 years. And prior to that, I've been in various different digital businesses, both as owner, COO, and some other kind of sales leadership roles. So seen a wide gambit of technology architectures, value props, good and bad, and that probably puts me in a decent position here to lead this conversation with Shawn. So I think we will get started. Again, the subject today is why B2B manufacturers need headless commerce. So maybe the best place to start, Shawn, is in a super wide, expansive question and to say, what is headless commerce?
Well, we'll start even with what is headless, and then we'll touch on what is headless commerce. Headless is the idea that you have a system that has data and functionality that doesn't have display of that data attached to it. So you're splitting those up. Most old systems, they did everything. They did the look, they did the feel, they stored the data, they did the whole thing, oftentimes referred to as monolithic systems, or even just a sort of traditional setup that you would be familiar with. And headless is we take that and we have a system that basically just returns data, takes data in, returns data out, and doesn't handle the display, and then something else handles the display. The idea being that now you can focus on the parts you're good at and get more flexibility in the other section. So if we talk about commerce, the headless part of it would be, the parts that store the products, that do the cart, push the payments through, do all that, logic and heavy lifting and stuff. It wouldn't be product pages and landers and those kinds of things necessarily. They may push data to those, but they don't actually do the display. And so we can split those up. Matt, I don't know if you don't want me to go into benefits of that, or if we just kind of want to.
I think we could. Yeah, we'll certainly get there. So just to kind of summarize that a little bit, like the original way of doing it, or more traditional way, is with this monolithic style. So what sort of platforms would people recognize when we're talking about a monolithic or kind of an all-in-one system?
I mean, it's going to be a lot of the traditional stuff was done that way. If you did things with a Magento, I mean, even technically, most Shopify setups are gonna work that way. An older, even a VTEX or a demand base, which is Commerce Cloud now, or Demandware, which is Commerce Cloud now. Those were all, the idea was you just sort of did them all together, right? It was, you got the whole system put together. Even, CMSs, a Drupal, a WordPress, things like that, all worked that way. It was kind of the standard.
Yep. And from what you're saying, I think what people can clearly intuit is that whilst most platforms used to be monolithic, it used to be the way to do it, most platforms now are transitioning to be able to be headless. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes. They have gone to be exclusively headless, or they at least can be headless. So something like I said, Shopify is not traditionally a headless, but you can make a headless build off of Shopify. Other ones like Elastic Path is just headless now. So they've gone that
Right.
far, but everyone has gone there to some extent. It'd be rare you can have a site that, or a platform of any sort, that can't function in a headless capacity, which basically means it does not have any API access available to it. It's very rare. Only old legacy systems basically have those issues.
Right. And just to kind of summarize again, understand there might be a different spectrum of expertise watching this webinar. By having no API access, effectively, your platform is your platform. You get what you get and you kind of don't get upset. You have what you have, right? But the ability to open up through using APIs allows you to enhance that functionality with outside systems.
Yeah, basically, I mean, API stands for application programming interface. It lets the data, lets things outside of that software get access to it. They can both pull data and push data into it. And without that, it's just a bubble. It's all closed. It can, as long as it can stay inside there, it's fine, but it can't really interact with anything else. Maybe through a data export or something, but not in a way that would work for a headless setup.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So I think that transitions on fairly well to kind of like, that's a basic understanding of, what a headless system is, and then a headless commerce system in that regard. So for a B2B company, a B2B manufacturer, what are some of the benefits of being in a headless architecture?
Yeah, I'll probably say there's two kind of main ones, and then we can discuss sort of details in them. One is because your systems are separated, you have a lot of freedom on the front end that you can do different stuff. And oftentimes a B2B setup needs more on the front end than just, some product pages. There can be complex pricing tables. The configure and buy flow can be really complicated because you're doing bulk orders or products that need heavy customization to them. It's not 6 t-shirts or something that you just put in a bag. Most of the time just the Amazon experience is insufficient, and so oftentimes your e-commerce platform either doesn't have sufficient functionality to cover your B2B needs, or it just isn't flexible enough to meet your business setups. Oftentimes with the B2B thing, they've developed their kind of business flow over 40, 50 years or something like that. And it's not so easy to just adapt it to match with a piece of software. There's clients that, long-standing clients and account managers and things like that. And it's much easier to tailor the display and functionality of the site to that than it is to shoehorn it into an e-commerce box.
Right, which is fairly ironic in that. Sorry to interrupt you, Shawn, but like this is the new way of doing it, but it's what allows you to really leverage all of the old systems that you have in place still, right?
Yeah.
And we see that typically with B2B companies, that they have lots of legacy systems that they're not ready to transition off, even though they know that they're maybe a little prohibitive, right?
Yeah, which was sort of the second half that I was going to go into is yes, it lets you be custom if your commerce platform or something doesn't support that, but it also lets you hook in all this really old stuff and still have a modern setup, because oftentimes you will have a really old system for processing orders or handling bulk pricing or something like that, some legacy system that you've been dealing with, and there might be some lift to expose that data via API, but it's less than it's orders of magnitude less than completely switching off that whole system. So it kind of lets you have the both worlds. You can have this nice modern front end, and your customers don't know that it's kind of old, in some parts behind the back end. And those can be done independently. And even then, because of the headless nature, you can always eventually switch out those old legacy systems, while keeping the front end the same. And the customers, your end users, are none the wiser that things are changing behind the scenes. Whereas if it's
sorry, I'll just stop you there, because I think that's a really key point to kind of highlight, is the fact that if you're a company on a trajectory to update your internal systems, you have this ancient inventory system that ties in with your CRM and account information that you've had forever. Everyone uses it. It's old. It needs to change, but you're not there yet. You can still have this modern customer experience and pull in that information. So that's one. But the big piece is that then when you are ready to transition off that system, it doesn't require a whole rebuild, correct? It's just a matter of changing the links to whatever the new system is. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes. And you can even, within that, oftentimes you can do it incrementally as well. So because you have this front end, we can say, okay, maybe, you said you have, like you used in your example, we have, inventory and a CRM and this and that. the lift of converting all that to a new setup may be almost impossible to do. You'd have to shut the company down for 3 months to do it, which is like not something that obviously you can do. So you say, okay, but maybe we can get to the point where we can modernize just the CRM, right? And so we'll do that, and then we can move another piece and another piece. But since we're just using this separate front end, those can be done one at a time. Whereas if that's all together and that's all one front end attached together, that has to be everything at once, and that can just be a lift that is basically impossible for most companies to handle. It's too much changeover from a process standpoint, from a code standpoint, from sort of everything that it can't be done. So
got it. Okay. And so I think it's fairly clear. Obviously, this is just some brief conversation here, but it's fairly clear that there's a really strong value prop, especially for B2B companies, because they typically have non-standard kind of checkout flows. They're not a typical e-commerce case, right? There's account information, there's purchase orders, there's tiered pricing, there's a whole magnitude of pieces. There's custom quoting compared to fixed price. The list can be pretty exhaustive, endless, I should say. So I think there's a fairly clear value proposition for B2B companies to have Headless with regards to managing their workflows and their systems. What are some of the benefits of a headless setup from a customer point of view? Is there speed improvements? Does it allow you to customize much more? Is it able to personalize? Like, what are some of the value props from a customer side of things?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of going to get all of those, but I'll sort of touch on some of them, how they're going to go for B2B. Sure. One of the biggest ones is you're going to get that modern setup that a customer can have, so it can feel, like a well-designed, responsive, modern browsing system. So it can be the same. Oftentimes, like a B2B, you might be competing against, a Staples, a Best Buy, and Amazon, and things like that are also going to sell similar products, right? So you need an appropriate experience that's going to match with them. And if you're dragging along all this other stuff you have from a B2B standpoint, it may be really difficult to provide that. And so if you can do Headless, you can provide this modern thing, so the customer gets that advantage of it's familiar. It's like other stuff they're working on. It's not, really old and cumbersome, right? Which maybe they would have put up with in the past, right? But they're used to a modern experience, so they're not going to do anything more, or say if you're trying to, lots of times B2B businesses are almost transitioning. They don't do online at all, really, right? Maybe they have a product catalog, but you can't actually purchase. It's still, account managers, order sheets, that kind of stuff. You're not going to, it's really hard to, if you just transition those people to a very poor online experience, they're going to immediately compare it against all the good online experiences they know, even the ones that aren't B2B, right? Anyone who's purchased B2B has still purchased stuff, for themselves, right? And so you're going to be against all those, really modern platforms.
And I think I'm just going to highlight that point again there, because I think it was a really good one you made. And, I think most people are over kind of complaining and talking about the impact of COVID now. Like, it feels like it's forever ago. But one thing that happened through that time was a mass adoption of online technology and online purchasing across all verticals and all business types, right? So whereas, as you mentioned, B2B companies used to maybe get away with not having a digital experience or one as good as other verticals, that kind of advantage or that leeway that they had is now most certainly gone, and all of the research shows that. I think the other thing that ties into that also is that more and more B2B purchases are now millennial or younger, and their expectation is always that they will have an Amazon-like experience. So this is certainly a way for a company to be able to do that without having to invest millions of dollars in an Amazon system.
Yeah, and their expectation is going to be that, and also they actually will have a specific dislike of the old system too, right? So it's not just do they want one, but they will actively avoid, trying to do the old setup, right? They want the to be able to buy online, to not necessarily have to talk to someone. It's not just that they expect something when they're not talking to someone, they expect to not talk to someone, if that makes sense. So this has to be this is your primary point of contact, sometimes the website, right? Like you can't rely on someone else being able to talk to them. So it has to do everything.
And absolutely. And I think in that vein as well, it's worth re-highlighting again that that's part of the benefit of headless for a B2B company as opposed to more of a monolithic, because you have so many customizations that you can make to make that experience truly be a digital version of your sales process and workflow, right? So if people need to be able to build custom quotes or specifications, if they need to be able to access certain types of pricing or bundles or all of those sort of things that are pretty non-standard in the regular B2C world, you're able to achieve all of that through a headless setup.
Yeah, if you have a big pricing matrix or something, which is very common, and most pricing matrices are a little different between B2B companies, you oftentimes need to convey all of that through the website. That's going to be your only point of contact. And so you need that flexibility there. Also, we were talking to circle back a little bit to, what does the customer get as an advantage? You talked about performance. There are some straight up performance benefits that we can do through, static site gen and a bunch of sort of, technical terms that can make a headless setup a little bit faster than a traditional monolithic one. But what it also can allow is you can oftentimes cover for kind of deficiencies. If you have older systems that have problem areas, where it might take 3-5 seconds, something like that, because you kind of have a separation there, oftentimes you can mask that a fair bit. You can put caching for,
right.
in between for that. So, hey, I can actually get you a price that's a few minutes old, right? But that's fine. And so I can get you that price almost instantly versus waiting 5 seconds for it. And doing these various things, or when you have, and you can take 3 systems and kind of put them together to appear as one system. And so there's a lot of kind of masking deficiencies that you can do. There are parts you haven't been able to update, improve. So you can give it's almost like you can give the impression of better speed than maybe is actually happening on the back end. So, whereas if you were just connecting directly to those systems, you would be unable to mask.
For sure. And I know that's a typical work case that we see in our B2B work with clients, because they have these older systems that are inherently slower, and there's not much to be done with that. So that masking or that disguise is definitely helpful, and we've definitely seen that on the front end for customers. Yeah. Okay.
To tack one little extra piece onto that too is sometimes it's not even from legacy systems. Oftentimes B2B just has more complicated things. The fact that, probably everyone who logs in is going to get custom pricing. That's the thing. You go to Amazon, or I go to Amazon, we see the same price. So that can be the same page that they send to everyone, which means it's a light and easy page to serve. You make one for everyone. With B2B, you have to have a different version of that page for possibly every single client that logs into it. And it's just naturally a heavier experience that they can do. So anything you can do to help that or mask that is an improvement, because somewhat you have to play even when it's unfair. People are going to compare you against sites that don't have to do that. Even that's not necessarily fair, but that's what people are going to do in their head. So you've got to compete with that. So.
And again, it just plays into that expectation from the customer, right? That it doesn't matter the use case, they expect to be able to get the information that they want like that. And if they don't, then they move on, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so one question that I kind of wanted to bring up, because in the conversations I have with B2B companies, and actually not just in B2B, but in general, is this premise of headless architecture. It's understood, but they also hear about things like decoupled architecture. And I just kind of wanted to touch on, I know that they are very similar as an architecture type, but there is some differences between them. So I thought it might be helpful just to spend a minute or two just discussing what the differences are. I mean, I think it's fair to say that in the case where headless is a good fit, decoupled would be a good fit over a monolithic, but there is nuances between the two, correct?
Yeah, and to start off, we've been talking, we've been saying, headless the whole time. Oftentimes what we've been talking about is also decoupled. Headless is going to be by far the most common sort of industry term for it. You will hear it used for sort of any time 2 systems are separated. But specifically, headless just means that you have a system that does not have a front end to it. So I mentioned an example, say like Elastic Path. They don't have a front end. That's a headless system. Decoupled just means it's a system that doesn't have to have a head, or can be split up into 2 parts, but there's still a head there. So there's still a front end that can be set up there. You don't necessarily have to provide your own. So if it's headless, they just say, here's the data, and displaying it is up to you. Now there are systems and software and stuff that you can get to do that system. But if something says they're headless, that means just, hey, we provide data and we don't provide a front end, or at least we provide the capacity to provide this data. If it says it's decoupled, it's we provide both sections. It's just that they can be configured and deployed and used separately. So they will be used interchangeably all the time. People will use them incorrectly a ton. Headless has almost turned into the kind of Kleenex way of saying it. If it just kind of means that whole setup, but to be pedantic, it only means the back end part of it that doesn't have a front end attached to it, which of course, without a front end isn't really that useful.
Yep. So for most of us who are non-developers and don't need to get overly in the weeds, then effectively decoupled and headless we can use. Again, we'll upset the developers in the room a little bit interchangeably. The key premise here is that these types of architectures are generally much better suited to B2B than a single monolithic system. And the premise here is that whoever you're working with from a development point of view can help you define whether a decoupled or a headless setup is the more appropriate route for you in your final architecture.
And you'll rarely be completely headless or decoupled in that setup. Usually things like logging into the admin backend or something will still be a more traditional setup, because there's less need for customization there, and a lot of the benefits we talked about, you only sort of get the functionality of the backend. Hence, so if you use one of those platforms, you'll still log into your e-commerce platform, log into your CMS, and do your config and management directly to them, and it's the display that will be headless. That's not always true. You can do headless admin sections and stuff as well, but it's quite common to not have the whole system completely headless. It's mostly between the user-facing part and the backend systems.
Got it. So just as an example then, because this might be sounding at this point a little bit scary for some companies with regards to feeling like this is a really big lift. It's many different platforms or programs or integrations. What would be an example of a fairly simple or straightforward headless use case?
Yeah, so a really common one that we do is you have your front end, and then you have a CMS, and you have an e-commerce platform. And so you have basically two headless backend systems that connect into one front. Lets you get, lots of robust content management from the CMS that maybe the e-commerce platform doesn't support, and lets you get all your e-commerce platform or functionality that obviously the CMS doesn't support. And they get presented in one nice, homogeneous front end to the user. So they're not feeling like, oh, you don't really have that thing where like you're on one site and then suddenly you have to go over to the shop site, which is like totally different and doesn't seem connected and doesn't make sense. You can have that nice integrated experience with, you're weaving content about your products in the ability to purchase them.
Yeah, and that seems like an obvious point, but that's a really good one to really clarify that although there's all these different systems in play, for a consumer, it's one seamless experience. And that's the point of it, right? Is that while we're doing all this magic in the background to pull data and information and serve up pieces from different spots, the whole point of this is to give a seamless, fast, and intuitive experience for the customer, right?
Yeah. And to throw in a bit of a marketing term, it always lets you do, best in breed. So you can kind of pick your CMS for its functionality. You can pick your e-commerce setup for its functionality. You can maybe pick your CRM. You don't necessarily have to pick just the ones that all come in one bundle. It doesn't have to be all Oracle. It doesn't have to be all Salesforce or something like that. Or, even you don't have to just be like, well, we use this e-commerce, so we have to make do with the CMS functionality it has, which isn't very good.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what we discussed at the start with regards to phasing as well, whereby, if you have, for example, an e-commerce platform that you currently use that you don't overly love, but all of your products are already in, you already feel comfortable that your staff are trained on it, etc. You can start with that as your e-commerce engine, but once your next budget cycle comes or your contract ends and you want to move to another, it doesn't require a full rebuild. It's a matter of just changing out that particular piece, right?
Yeah, so a very common starting point we'll do is we'll say, hey, we're going to set you up with a front end. And the only new or updated piece we're going to put in is usually a CMS, because that's kind of the easiest one. CMS doesn't have history, right? We don't really care about what the content was 5 years ago or something. Orders, products and stuff, we need to know, people need to look up old orders. We need to have reference. We need to hook up to their accounts, those things. So it's a much heavier lift to do. So we'll say, hey, new front end, maybe we'll put in a new CMS. You can add your new content into there. And then all the other systems will stay the same. And we can work on that on a much longer timeline, because since we have the modern front end, it kind of buys us some more time. Essentially, we've sort of faked it. And so, hey, we're not going to get immediately run over by some of our competitors while we still have this older system. Maybe it's a bit cumbersome for us to use on the back end. Maybe it's not cost efficient, but we have time. We're not just sitting there with no platform where we do a 3-year migration project or something. So.
Right. Perfect. That's a great clarification to make. So in basic terms, it can be as simple as a CMS, so a content management system for the backend admin staff and marketing team to be able to update and dynamically create pages and edit content and all of those pieces. You would have the e-commerce platform for the products and pricing and all of those pieces. And then you have this front end that allows you to link those together and ultimately join in other systems as you continue to kind of grow and evolve as a business. Sounds a little less scary when it's put like that, because obviously we're thinking also long term it could be enormous, right? So with that then, with it being multiple systems, what does that look like for a B2B company with regards to the development team that they need? Do they need multiple agencies? Do they need individuals on staff with different competencies or expertise? What does it look like from a management and build point of view on the development side?
Yeah, so you are going to need people with different skill sets. You'll probably have a different skill set for the team that works on the front end, versus the team that, say, works on the e-commerce back end. It might even also be where, one of those is a SaaS offering or something, so you don't work on it very much, whereas one of those is much more of an in-house or something done by an agency, so you have a team. But the idea is meant to be that you don't have to have people who know all of those systems. Each person only has to know one part of the system, because they don't really need to work on the other part. If I work on the back end e-commerce, that's fine. I just work on that and I expose the data out, and then the front end teams pick it up and they work with it. And conversely, the front end team doesn't need to be able to go. They might just say, hey, I need this piece of data. They just say that to the back end team, that they present it. And that's that. Oftentimes, even the setup is that the back end team just sort of makes as much as possible available, and then the front end team can pick and choose what they need. And so if they need to make changes, they never even need to talk to the back end team. They just use the data differently that they already had access to. And that's kind of the sort of goal with the whole setup, is to split these teams up so that they can work independently. That's the part we haven't talked about much, but a lot of the initial push for Headless comes from just literally being able to split up the teams. So you didn't have to have 40 people all working on the same piece of software. You could have 4 teams of 10, each working on a different section. And it's just more efficient for smaller teams to work together. And if one team has problems or one team screws something up or whatever, the problems are isolated to one section, right? So it's not that, everything goes down. Say the front end team screws something up. Maybe people have trouble, purchasing at that point. That doesn't seem good, but at least, customer service can still be processing orders and things like that, right? So that's so much better than both of those systems being broken, right? Or vice versa or something like that, right? Even if you have your sites up and people can still see and search, they just can't quite purchase orders. It's not great. It's better than the whole setup being down. And so you get those things where changes and maintenance and all that stuff can be isolated.
For sure. And that's another really good point, right? The ability to segment those pieces really allows the security that one piece doesn't bring down the whole, and B, that, if you're building and iterating as a company as well, you're able to do that much faster, because again, the whole doesn't have to be edited every time to do incremental increases on the pieces of the whole, right? So yeah, that's a really good call out. So I guess it's a little bit of a vague or an expansive question, but what are some of the things that a company, like if they're considering digitally transforming, so they either don't have a commerce offering from a B2B standpoint right now, or they have, what we hear more often is that they tried it, it didn't work. They've had a few painful experiences, and now they're not quite sure how to handle. What are some of the things that a B2B company would maybe tick off as items to say, okay, we should probably have a conversation around a headless architecture and look at what that might look like?
I mean, there can be multiple ones. I would say the most obvious one is they have pieces of their system that are can't necessarily be changed, or they don't want to change, right? So they have this this automatic sort of hamstring that kind of throws out most monolithic options because they have to keep this one piece. So everything can't be a single platform because they need to keep this one old piece. So, either you have to transfer all that data into a new system or something, or you can go to a headless setup where you just keep that as part of it. You work around it for the time being, or maybe forever, right? But you can have modern pieces on the other section. That's one that's really common. Another one can be where you are maybe already updating those systems, or you have lots of plans in there, but it's going to be a long process. It's going to take years or so. It's not uncommon for a big digitization process that to take 5 years or something like that, right? Even just for one section, let alone sort of digitizing an entire company. And so you can build the front end piece fast. You can get it up in weeks, months, things like that, and you can start hooking functionality up to it as it comes online from the bigger process. You don't have to, whereas if it's all monolithic, you kind of have to wait till the end, usually, once it's all switched over, then you get it. And so you spend years sitting with, nothing, or a completely subpar experience, while your competitors and everything are deploying stuff. So it lets you get that big head start because, again, they're not attached. There's like you said, it's a really big question. There's tons of use cases I would go into, but those are two that jump to mind: is to work around an old system, or get something up quickly, while other stuff is taking a long time.
Yeah, and to supplement an existing system, right? You can modernize an older system really quickly by doing pieces of a headless and gradually continuing to develop on that, right? That's really good, Shawn. So I think that probably covers off the basics of it. Again, there's so many different use cases that are in place for headless, and specifically for B2B. So we could probably talk for another 30 minutes on different examples, but we wouldn't make people sit through that. So I think what would probably be better is that if you're out there and you're watching this, and you're a B2B manufacturing company, you have some questions, some queries around headless, or you want to discuss a digital transformation project, would be happy to have that conversation with you here at Acromedia. We specialize in B2B manufacturing, e-commerce. We have lots of use cases that we have done and solved, and felt your pains with you and solved them for you. So yeah, if you're open to a conversation, reach out to us. If not, if you're just discussing this internally, again, monolithic typically isn't a great fit for B2B because of all of the complexities and custom pieces that they have. So headless, decoupled is likely a good route for you. And this maybe kickstarts your research into that for your own organization. So Shawn, I want to thank you for your time and coming on here. I know you see my face a lot during the day, but it was nice to see you right now. And thank you for putting on a clean shirt. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, reach out to us at Acromedia. Thanks a lot, everyone.